Hi, I am Jennifer. I am the social media marketer here at Project Excite. Just a little background, Project Excite is an entrepreneur hub at the U and we support student engineers. This is part of the Xplore workshops, which supports students who have an idea or early stage company and want to validate their idea or want to continue growing and establish ventures. As you all know, as you may know, sorry, we've we've opened up Explore workshops to the public for free during this time. And today we do have Joe, who is going to show about accelerating a software launch. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm going to go through, let's go through just the gender real quick, and I'll cover bio and background. Obviously I'll go through my background, but I also wanted to mention IBM's internship program, and then I'll be talking about the well-baked approach as we go through this presentation. I start with my current role. So I lead the go-to-market for a broad portfolio of software applications. And think of it as a software that changes the way complex assets are being managed in the future. So we're using technologies such as the Internet of Things or IoT data, and then artificial intelligence. So that's a pretty big summarization of what I do. It's like I said, it's a pretty wide portfolio of products. It does include three major offerings. One is called Maximo, one's called Tririga, and then one's called IBM Engineering. But there's a set of offerings underneath each one of those. I'm also in charge of the weather offerings as well. So IBM acquired the weather company, and that brought a set of offerings with it as well. I'm actually an entrepreneur, so I always say I'm an entrepreneur doing what an entrepreneur does, but inside of IBM. Right now, just within the portfolio, I'm working on over 6 different product launches and the modernization of those 3 major portfolios that I mentioned. The broader background is I've launched over 20 plus software products. I quit counting. It's about a product a year for the past 20 years. So I've been launching product after product after product, all software based. I was CEO of Iniqua up until 2 years ago. So I sold that company to IBM. So that's how I wound up inside of IBM. Was I sold the company to them. And then prior to that, I was CEO of a company called Clockwork Solutions. That was sold to LMI. And my primary role there, although I didn't lead the sale of the company, I modernized the product in the company. So everything, including the website, all the way through the actual product, the go-to-market, the messaging got modernized through that process. And then before that, I was at a company called Servigistics, and I was there through the sale of the company to PTC. One item with my background, I actually started as an IBM intern. So this is my second time here at IBM. And I actually started when I was 19 years old. Halfway through my freshman year, I got a call from my father, and he said, "Joe, I'm out of money." And so I responded by saying, "Well, I'm not coming home." So I figured out a way to pay for school. So I started off originally as an IBM intern. I was 19 years old at the time. I had never even used an IBM computer when I started as an intern there. But that's where I started my career in both computers and in software. So when there's a will, there's a way. That's what drove me even as early as at the age of 19. So I do want to mention that IBM does have an internship program. As I take the opportunity to do this, you can use the URL below to apply. I would encourage you guys to look at a program like this. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of interns across the globe, and it really does immerse you into real world roles that get work done. So you're not just given grunt work as an intern. You're given an opportunity to do something big and to make an impact. So I know I was given some pretty significant roles when I was an intern way back, and I know the interns that I'm bringing into my area are given significant roles as well. This is an example of a program. So for example, some of the early hires that we've brought in, we put them through this Austin Design Studio, and they're running incubator projects. So they're incubating ideas and technologies across the portfolios inside of IBM. So they're actually designing a new product and incubating new products. And so that's one of the examples of what we do with interns. So enough of that. So before I actually talk about the well-baked approach, I need to actually give you an example of one of the offerings that I took through this particular process. There's an offering called the Digital Twin Exchange. We announced it about a year ago at one of our user conferences. And the actual offering, the final launch will be the end of this month is kind of where it stands currently. But we made a market announcement almost 9 months ago that we were coming to market with a solution. So let me walk you through what the solution does, because I think it'll give some context or help provide some background on the type of offering that we used the well-baked requirements approach on. And then one of the point I'd like to make is feel free to ask questions as we go along. You're on mute now, so you can either go into the chat, and if that's one way to ask a question. You can also go on off mute. So I'm more than happy to take questions as we go along. The more interactive, the better. I think that's more helpful for me to get an idea of what questions you have as we go along. So let's talk about the Digital Twin Exchange. What is this thing? There's an operating model change occurring in the way assets are being managed. So the most common thing you may hear about is an autonomous vehicle or automated robot. But there's both the engineering of assets, the management of assets is fundamentally changing. Like, for example, this is a piece of mining equipment. And so this piece of mining equipment may actually have an autonomous driver. And so someone could be actually remotely operating this, or it may be programmed to go back and forth under a certain track or a certain path. And so there's no one even driving the vehicle. It has embedded sensors all over it, sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of sensors. So for example, an aircraft now has thousands of sensors. A typical automobile has hundreds, if not thousands of sensors embedded within it that do all kinds of things, including crash protection and other things. There's an onboard computer. So there's embedded in the actual asset, there's a computer that's driving all kinds of functions within the actual asset. It makes the asset self-aware. It makes it intelligent. It collects a lot of data, and it's part of what the sensors are connected to, and it's potentially helping with the autonomous, being able to drive it autonomously. There's most likely somebody remotely monitoring that equipment. So someone could be sitting in a remote operation center or monitoring center, or they can be sitting halfway across the globe monitoring this piece of equipment. So you have 24/7 monitoring of equipment. That's starting to happen, and it's continuing to be proliferated across all different types of equipment. And then there's things like artificial intelligence or machine learning that's being applied to this equipment. So think of a predictive model. So it's going to predict how this equipment's going to operate over the next day, week, month, year, potentially 5 to 10 years. So you're forecasting out predictive failures and how this equipment's going to operate. You're doing that so you can better plan people, parts, equipment, and the cost of operating the equipment over that period of time. So the last one I'm going to mention is what the actual offering I'm going to use as my example in this talk. It's what's called a digital twin. So you see the picture of that physical truck. Well, there's a digital version of that. So think of a 3D model, or the CAD model, or the parts list, the user manual. There's a set of digital a set of artifacts that are stored digitally that match the physical. So we call that the digital twin, and obviously it's called a twin for obvious reasons. It matches the digital matches the physical. So in order to manage assets in this new environment, in this new way, it requires the digital twin. So we can't apply artificial intelligence models or machine learning to physical assets when we don't have the digital representation of it. So it's required to make artificial intelligence work. The reason companies are moving to this model is that the operating cost is 15 to 50% less. So think of that autonomous driver. It's a lot less expensive to operate this equipment. So if your competitors are using autonomous equipment and you're not, your costs are going to be much higher. Even if there's not an autonomous driver, it's still going to drive about a 15 to 20 to 30% reduction in operating costs. So it's not all about autonomous driving. So only certain types of equipment are going to be run autonomously or robotically. It's also about increasing the uptime of that equipment. It's more than just uptime as well. It's actually the lifespan of the equipment as well. So think of it this way, your vehicle now, if you purchase a brand new car, it's going to last a lot longer than a car that was manufactured 10, 15 years ago. Equipment, things like brakes, oil in your car doesn't have to be changed as frequently. So everything's being designed to be more eco-friendly and to last longer. So by maintaining the equipment better, managing it better, you're going to be able to, instead of operating that equipment for 5 years, you may be able to make it last for 7 years or 10 years. So that's going to help the environment. It's going to reduce waste, and it's going to be cheaper or less expensive to operate that equipment over time. A good example of that would be Tesla. So Tesla is really shipping a platform. Most people think they're in the automobile business, but what they've provided is a vehicle platform that's upgradable, and they'll actually even push out new applications out to their car. Like they put a video game on the big screen inside their car where you can use the steering wheel of the car to play the video game. Now, anyone who's a parent would fall out of their chair because you don't want to teach kids to play around with the steering wheel of a car. But I think they were pushing out stuff like that, one, to just make noise in the market and show off the fact that they have an upgradable car platform. So there's an Italian car manufacturer now that even has a car platform where you can interchange the seats in different colors and patterns inside the vehicle. So you're going to see more and more of that as time goes on in the future. So this is an example of what the digital twin exchange is. Think of it as an iTunes for digital equipment. So I can go search online. It's a first of its kind, and it's an offering that helps providers sell their asset, the predictive models associated with the asset, the bill of materials, the user manuals, all the things needed to operate a piece of equipment digitally. And we're targeting initially asset-intensive industries. So you're seeing like a mining excavator or a Thermex chiller model in that example. But it's anything that's heavy equipment. So think of a utility, think of transportation like a train, or think of mining equipment. And it goes on and on and on. So anything that's heavy equipment or asset intensive fits what we're doing with this exchange. So it's an online store in iTunes per se for digital equipment information. It does include more than just predictive models. So here's an example content. So parts list, user manuals, maintenance plans, forecast models, stocking strategies, service manuals, on and on and on. So 3D CAD models is a common thing that you're seeing when people are talking about digital twins. I'm going to show a quick little video, and then we'll move on to the well-baked design piece of it. So this will give you an understanding of the offering. So when I'm describing it, it'll make a little more sense. So a couple-minute video.
Do you have the information you need to efficiently operate your business's physical assets? IBM Digital Twin Exchange bridges the information gap between businesses and asset providers. Today, asset owners, technicians, and engineers are facing many challenges rooted in the inadequate ways of obtaining critical digital information about their assets. Information like the bill of materials, parts lists, user manuals, maintenance plans, and AI models. Introducing IBM Digital Twin Exchange, a two-way marketplace that connects content providers with end users. A digital twin refers to the digital representation of a physical thing. IBM Digital Twin Exchange helps asset managers perform their jobs effectively and accomplish more. For vendors, information like the bill of materials can be easily tagged and uploaded. For end users, technicians can search, purchase, and download digital twin content in one place. And with integrations across the IBM portfolio, technicians can easily import data with a click of a button into enterprise asset management solutions like IBM Maximo Asset Management. This is just the beginning of IBM's digital twin journey. We're a step closer to making a fully operating twin a reality through the help of IBM, the Internet of Things, and AI. Together, we can equip technicians of the future with a live model of their physical asset, optimizing performance throughout its entire lifecycle. IBM Digital Twin Exchange invites content providers to join today. Learn more and schedule a demo with a team member by visiting us online.
Okay.
Do you have the information?
So that's the exchange. So let's talk about the well-baked and how to get a software product launched quickly, which is the kind of the meat of this presentation. So we started with just the context of the product that we were launching and some idea of kind of what that involves. So we can use a relevant example of a real product launch as background for this. And once again, just a reminder, feel free to ask questions as we go along. Any questions so far before I jump into the well-baked approach? Okay, let's keep going. So what do I mean by well-baked? I've been launching software for a long time, so I came up with this general description, and really what I'm really trying to describe, and I define it in more detail. So by well-baked, what I mean is that a developer has everything they need to build out 95% of the functionality that I'm trying to get built. If you look at the life cycle of a software product, the majority of the time is actually spent in the software development side of it. It's writing the code. There's very few software applications that are simple as Twitter, that has a very simple, just few screens. That being said, even the back end of Twitter is very, very complex and required a lot of coding for it to scale. But that being said, the typical environment with software is that the software developers spend about 50% of their time coding. So they're spending the other 50% of the time trying to figure out what to build and how to build it. And what I've learned is that it's a really inefficient way to build software. The other issue with it is a developer trying to decide what to build, they may not understand the customer, the market, or the requirements associated with what you're trying to do. So it looks like we have a question. Let's go ahead and see if I can get to the. I don't know, Jennifer, if you can look at the Q&A and if you can read out the question. Because I don't know if I can get to the Q&A.
Oh yeah, that's just a question for if this will be recorded, and yes, it will be. It is going to be on our YouTube after this is over.
Okay. All right, perfect. So you move from a model from coding 50% of your time, 50% of a developer's time, to 95%. So automatically your developers are twice as productive as the typical developer. The second thing is, once again I mentioned, is software developers may not, once again, understand the domain or what they're trying to build. So they're more likely to potentially get it wrong. They may not have spoken to customers. They may not have spoken to actual users of the actual software. So they're guessing at what to build. And because the software development process is so expensive and so time consuming, just getting it wrong is going to cost you a lot of time and money. I didn't realize that the approach I was using was producing software that much faster until I was at one of the companies I was at. They were owned by a private equity firm, and they were trying to acquire other companies. So they approached me and they said, okay, who would be some potential companies we would acquire to do a roll up? And I gave them a list of 20 companies. What I didn't realize is they were going to call every single one of them and get me on calls with them. So I wind up going on call after call after a call. And what I saw was, companies that had built one product and they had been working on that one product for 10 years. And then I spoke to another company. Once again, they built one product and they'd been working on that single product for 15 years. And so here I was sitting at a company and we were launching a new product every 12 months. So I'm like, why is the output of these other companies not that high? Why do they not have more products in their portfolio than what we were producing at that time at the company I was at? And what I realized is that it was the way they were launching software. So typically when they were launching a new software product, they build it the first time. And because they don't actually understand and they haven't really defined in enough detail and they haven't validated with users of the market what they're trying to launch, that initial product runs into problems. So the initial customers start using the software and they provide feedback to the software developers and to the team that built the product. That being said, then the software developers and teams start to modify the product and they start to take feedback from the actual customers. And the problem is because they've already built an initial product, trying to modify it, it becomes much more difficult. And you're trying to modify something that already exists. So think of it as I built a house and I initially built a 1-bedroom house. Well, if you try to add a second, third, fourth, fifth bedroom, the design sometimes doesn't flow as well as it could have if you would have just decided to build a 3-4 bedroom house from the beginning. So the same thing happens with software. If you build it one way and find that it's drastically wrong or needs to be different, the result is not very good. So what typically happens is after making a bunch of changes to the software, sometimes over a 1 to 3 year period, the software company decides they need to just redesign it from scratch. They need to relaunch it. So you wind up seeing a lot of software companies relaunch or modernize or fix their products in year 3, 4, or 5. So now you're actually building it a third time. So if you would have just built it correctly the first time, that you wouldn't have had to build it a second time or build it a third time. So the approach that most companies are using to build software is probably the most expensive way to build software that's possible, right? It's very, very expensive to build software that way. So let's keep going through the next step of this, the next piece of what I'm describing. But try to remember this definition. It's 95% of what a developer needs, resulting in 95% of their time coding. There's certainly a lot more to it than just this, but this is a good way to measure whether or not you're actually delivering well-baked requirements or not. So it looks like a question came through. Jennifer, if you want to, is there a question?
Yeah, there's actually 2 questions. First one is this approach diametrically opposed to lean and agile?
It's not. So I'm actually going to show you later on in this presentation that we're actually using Agile to deliver the product. So there is a way to do this in an Agile manner. And I've been using Agile for at least 15, maybe 20 years now. Not even knowing it was Agile when I first started doing it. So, but it does lend well to Agile, but you have to be intentional about it, right? You have to understand and know Agile and plan on doing Agile as you build the product. What's the second question?
Second question is a little longer. It's from Jacob. I am a law student. I've paid a development team to code my project for me. My issue is trademarking, patenting, and incorporating the business. I'm in a pickle. I need funding to get these legal services, but in order to get the funding, I need to make sales. However, once I make sales, the clock starts ticking on patent opportunities 1 year. Additionally, by putting the product in the marketplace without a patent pending, opening myself up to my ideas being copied and my product to be reverse engineering. What do you recommend? Are there any specific ventures, capital firms, or angel investors that are specifically interested in software?
Yeah. As I go through this approach, you'll see that this approach actually helps with that as well. So before actually building and shipping the product, I'm spending a lot of time validating the product with just design. So I'm creating high fidelity designs and getting feedback from potential customers. You can put those customers under NDA, or those potential customers under NDA, so they're not able to copy and share your idea. And you're not actually bringing the product to market by doing that. You're actually doing just user testing, or what I call right testing with the market. At the end of the day, you're going to have to patent your idea at some point in time, though. So the product development cycles are long, and they may be longer than the time frame for the provisional patent as well. So at some point in time, you're going to have to get funding or bite the bullet and get the patent filed. Trademarks are a lot easier to file, so if I would file the trademark immediately if you can. But the patent process is a little more expensive and obviously more time consuming as well. But once again, I do a lot of upfront planning and work before I start the clock. The other thing I do is I use the design or high fidelity prototype that I'm about to show you an example of. We use that to drive sales as well. So your other problem is lack of sales. So I'm using a clickable prototype that's not full functioning code to get customers to write checks. And typically I use that prototype and that initial design to validate that a customer's even going to write a check. Because if I can't get a customer to write a check, then I'm wasting my time. So my point of view is I shouldn't even be writing the check to be building the software or to pay developers to build a product until I have a customer who's ready to buy it. So I start the clock on coding once someone's written a check. And I can give you examples of this. One company I was at, we were competing against two other companies. We believed we had a better idea. We can take an existing product plus extend it with another module and another solution and create a product. In this case, it would save a company. The company we were speaking to was going to save them $50 million a year recurring. We prototyped out the entire solution. We used kind of well-baked design to define it. And we competed against those other two customers who had existing products on the market that were fully coded. In the end, the customer wrote us a check, they actually wrote us a $6 million check. Through the sales process, we told them it was going to take 18 months to build it because remember, we just showed them a clickable prototype. We were very direct with the customers, say this product still needs to be built. But because it was a better solution, better design, better approach was going to save them $50 million a year recurring, they were willing to write us a $6 million check. So, certainly you don't get $6 million checks very easily. We had built up trust with that customer with the previous solution that we had sold them. But in the end of the day, we got a $6 million check before we even wrote a single line of code. So I'm using this approach to generate sales as well. And like I said, if you can't get someone to purchase what you're designing or what your idea is, you may want to rethink the idea, because a check is where the rubber hits the road, right? Rubber meets the road. So let me keep going through. So I kind of been alluding to this, that the approach is driven by design. And
Sorry,
so,
you got one more question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Do you recommend separating the product manager and developer role?
Typically, yes. I think, on a small startup, everybody's doing everything. But oftentimes you need someone who can define and write the requirements, who has a little more domain knowledge versus the developer. But on the other hand, I've seen very successful developers design and build products and get them to market. The problem you typically run into is someone who's good at design is typically never good at coding, and it goes into right brain versus left brain. So if someone's very good with math and analytical things, they're typically on the opposite spectrum of being good at design. So I have yet to find the person who's both a really good designer and a really good coder. If you're that person, I'd love to hire you, because I've been doing this for 20 years and I've yet to find that person. So you typically need to split up the roles just because of the nature of kind of right brain versus left brain in terms of being able to design and build a product. That being said, I've seen software developers get products to market. They don't always look great, but they get to market. So, but like I said, the products that I've been shipping tend to have higher design, better design, and customers seem to expect that nowadays. Kind of the hack together software application. Those days are in the past. Most customers expect high usability and design incorporated into their product. Another question came through.
Yes. The check approach, does this mainly only apply to large enterprises products or also cheap customer products, apps, for example?
You have to remember, I've been at startups majority of the last 20 years. I've only been at IBM since selling a company to them. So I've been using this at more small to medium size software companies. So the majority of the products out of those 20 products I launched had eight to 10 software developers or less, right? So the majority of the products typically started with 1, 2, or 3 developers. And then we ramped up as the product matured to like 8 to 10 software developers as well. So this applies to smaller efforts as well. It actually works better for smaller efforts. It's not, this is not a big company approach by any means. That being said, I've brought this approach inside of IBM, and it's actually making products get shipped much, much faster. It's actually slower, and it's quicker to launch a product in a smaller team, in a smaller environment than it is inside of a big company like IBM. So, okay. It's a good question so far. A few things. When I talk about leading by design, what I'm mentioning is we're creating high fidelity screen designs that match exactly how the software is going to look. So a lot of times when you're demoing it to customers, you can't even tell it's not real software. It's that accurate, and it's that of that high fidelity. And the reason I'm doing that is it gives me better confidence that we have the right idea. It's actually a lot cheaper to prototype and design on paper, because remember, all the cost is in the software development side of it. It's software developers are expensive, and it's very time consuming to code. We're getting alignment kind of across teams and people within the company, also getting alignment with potential partners and customers and investors as well, by the way. Once you actually have this high fidelity design, the development goes much, much faster because the developer knows exactly what to build. They're not spending their time trying to design a screen. Most software developers hate designing screens, by the way. You might as well ask them to decorate your living room, right? It's that type of work. They'd rather be coding than doing screen design. The first time goes way up. So remember I talked about building that product 3 times. I fix all those issues on paper. So I'm iterating through sometimes I'm iterating through 10, 11, 12 versions of the initial prototype. I'm doing it all on paper. And so I'm working out all the bugs, all the issues in the design before I write a single line of code. So once again, it seems like a lot of extra time on the upfront and in the design, but the overall product timeline is shortened, and I'm not launching that product 2-3 times. Okay. So let me keep going through this as we go through. Obviously, I'm sure there'll be more questions. But my goal is to create a clickable prototype that I can walk customers through, sales, services, partners through, to show them what I'm planning to build, and investors, by the way. Okay. One thing, once I'm actually building the actual design, I'm using a process called write. So it's, I didn't invent this, neither did IBM. You can actually go Google write testing, but it's rapid iterative testing and evaluation studies. So as I'm prototyping screens, I'm reaching out to users and I'm getting feedback, and through testing. With tools like WebEx and Zoom, this has gotten much easier. So you can actually turn the video on, see the user's reactions. You can actually have them click on the screens and let them take control over the screens without handing over the designs to them, right? So we used to do user testing in labs that had 2-way mirrors and cameras, and it was very expensive to do. But like I said, with a tool like Zoom or WebEx, I can be testing a user halfway across the world and still get the same level of data that I was doing with those manual user tests way back. Um, think of it as a form of user testing or usability testing. The changes are made with each iteration. So like I mentioned, sometimes I'm doing up to 12 iterations, which, on the design. Hopefully you get it right in the second, third, fourth, or fifth iteration, but you keep iterating until you get it right. You kind of rinse and repeat until you're meeting the standard of usability that you're looking for. And then you're also infusing user feedback early into the design process, saving time and money. So you're kind of coupling this continuous user feedback early in the process, and you're getting a lot more insight as to whether or not someone would even purchase this product, or if a user would find it useful in their day-to-day life. So like I said, right, you can Google Write, and there's whole write-ups on what Write testing is, and it's provide a better description of what it is. One of the other things is we define really well-defined user personas. So this goes back to the digital twin example. This is one of the personas. This is a buyer inside of a company. She's a hard negotiator. She makes vendors give her the best deal. We also even measure, is she an introvert, an extrovert, analytical, creative, conservative, liberal, passive, active, right? We know what her goals are, saving the company money. We know what her motivations are in terms of whether it's financial incentives, fear, growth, power, social. Preferred channels, like is she looking at traditional ads, online, social media? We have a short bio of kind of her typical role. And then we're driving, okay, where does she get information from? She reads books like How to Negotiate. She may read the Wall Street Journal. She may look at vendor websites, on and on and on, right? So we spend a lot of time really understanding who the profile of the customer is or the user is in the actual software as we're going through, and we're designing what the software is going to do and how it's going to work. It doesn't take that long to do this. You should be able to get through, if you know what you're building and the market you're building it for, and you know who the customer is, you should be able to define your user roles in just a few days, right? This shouldn't be a 5-week exercise to determine who the persona is. If you don't know who the persona is, you don't know what you're building, and you don't know who you're selling it to. And if that's the actual case, you probably need to do some research, right? And as you do that research, you'll get better narrowed in as to who the potential user of the software is. The second thing is, once we actually have a user persona, we're using what's called the use case map. And I don't know if in school, if they're even teaching you guys what use case maps are anymore, but I'm using this to define the whole scope of the system is. So basically, I'm looking at, what do you think what the software is going to do in its entirety over the next 2-3 years? And so the use case map is, once again, we're typically doing this in 1, 2, 3 days, maybe 5 days, but we're actually defining the end-to-end solution. And I'm doing that because I'm trying to get my prototype, my design, to be as much of an end-to-end prototype as possible as well. That being said, someone mentioned Agile. When I actually go to do the designs, I'm going to prioritize which of these I actually do. So I may do register as my first sprint, login as my second sprint, on and on and on. So I'm going to pick an order in which I'm going to go through and design these. I'm also going to pick the order in which I'm going to go through and develop these things as well. But once again, if you don't know the end-to-end scope of what you're trying to build, you don't know the check you're going to be writing over the next 1, 2, 3 years, and you don't know how much work you have ahead of you. And then I go back to that example with the house. If you know that your end game is a 3-bedroom house, a 4-bedroom house, there's some things you can do up front to make it more efficient as you go and build out the rest. You don't necessarily need to build it all at once, but if you know that you're building a 3-4 bedroom house, there's certainly some things you can do. Like you could put the septic system could be large enough for a 3-4 bedroom house versus a 1-bedroom house as well. So if you understand construction, that may or may not make sense. So this is think of this as a broad scope or a roadmap for where you're trying to go with your product. Any questions on this?
Yes, you have one. Any specific software you recommend for designing a high fidelity prototype?
Um, the I've I've actually done it in PowerPoint, but you typically most designers are using tools, right? They're using Photoshop or Illustrator to design screens, and there's other tools as well, right? That so it depends on what tool you know. I don't spend a lot of time learning new tools. If after 25 years of doing this, you get burnt out on kind of learning the next new tool. But like I said, some of the designers that I work with, they've taken screens and they've broken down all the different pieces into Photoshop or Illustrator. One tool that seems to be the most widely used is a tool called Sketch. So a lot of screen designers are using Sketch today. But once again, I've used PowerPoint as well. I've prototyped every little bit of a screen, and I create little components, and I rearrange them in PowerPoint to draw a screen. A customer can't tell the difference if it's done well. So it's not necessarily a function of the tool. It's more a function of the skill set to be able to design a screen from there. In terms of use case maps, I tend to use PowerPoint as my tool. Some people use Visio, but once again, I'm adverse to learning new tools because I can just do this so quickly in PowerPoint because I know it. So there's tons of tools out there that draw use case maps, but once again, you got to spend the time to learn the tool. And I'm trying to get a product out the door. My goal isn't to learn a tool. My goal is to ship a product. So I'm looking for the fastest path to get the work done without sacrificing quality. So good question on that. Any other questions on a use case map? I'm curious. I'm definitely curious to see if you guys even still talk about or use use case maps. Some people use user journeys as another example. There's a book called User Story Test, or the user stories is another example. But I think the issue I run into with user stories is it doesn't show me the interaction, and it doesn't show me the full scope of what I'm trying to design or build. So oftentimes we'll mix and match. So we'll generate user stories, and then we'll also design a use case map as well. So it's just two different ways of kind of looking at some of the same information. Okay. So once again, this was this purchasing buyer persona I described earlier, and this is the set of functionality that we would deliver for her in the system over X number of sprints over the next 12 months. Okay. Into each one of these individual items gets broken into a use case. So I actually took one of these. I took a real simple one, and which is the my account, my profile. And so I provided an example of a use case for that. So what that does is it takes that one particular bubble on that screen, and it breaks it into more detail. So in this particular case, I have a use case name. It's my account, my profile. The description is it describes the user's account information. So that's what the use case describes. The requirement is the user will have the ability to view and update their account information. And what I've learned is that writing requirements is a lost art. I think back when I first started, just right out of college, people were very, very detailed in writing requirements. That's gotten worse and worse as time has gone on. So this requirement is actually poorly written. It actually should be two different requirements. It should be the user should have the ability to view, and it should be much more specific, like this field, this field, this field, this field, right? And then updating their account information should be a second requirement because they're really two different requirements. So when you go to test and when you go to implement this, those are two different requirements. So there's tons of books on writing detailed requirements. I would highly suggest learning how to write at the level of fidelity that a software developer needs, because code is very specific. Code is not ambiguous. So let me keep going through this. Once you actually design the screen, we call that a wireframe. So you'd actually insert the screenshot there. But the next step is just telling you the menu path. So the user selects my account. from their user icon on the upper right of the screen. And it's saying who the actor is. That's the persona. But it's also saying there's a precondition. So the user is logged in. So before they can click on the my account icon, they log into the system. And then it shows the menu path. So the user clicks on the icon from the chooses my account. Once they click on that, there's post conditions. So it's showing that the system displays their username, which is an email address, the password, and you have to be specific. It's encrypted using XYZ, whatever specific encryption algorithm you're using. There's a change password button that I can click on to then change the password, on and on and on, as an example. And then the next two things are actually even more important. It's the alternative path. What are some things that the user can do alternatively on the screen? And then what are the exceptions? So you have to remember my original statement is 95% of what a developer needs in order to code this screen. So sit down with your software developers and ask them what they need, right? So a software developer will read this use case. When they go to code it, if there's missing information, it depends on the developer. Some of them will just fill it in. Some of them will do exactly what you say. And so, for example, that exception path, they would not code that. So they'll let the user key in anything in the email address field. They won't validate that it's a valid email address because you didn't put that in the requirements. You didn't put that on paper. So, the software developer is not specific in how they code it. Okay. Any questions on this? Because this part of it is where most people get lost in the process. They can't describe in enough detail what needs to be built in the software for a software developer to even go out and build it. And this level of detail is also being used by the UI designer. So when the UI designer designed the screen, they know what fields to put on the screen by reading this actual use case. So if I'm a screen designer, I can't just make up what's going to be on the My Account screen. I guess I could, but that's not necessarily going to be a very fast way to design it because there's going to be a lot of back and forth and in terms of what to design and how to design it. Okay. All right, so let's keep going. So from the actual use case map that you saw earlier, from the persona, and then the detailed use cases that we wrote for that digital twin exchange solution, we then created a prototype. So I'm going to actually walk you guys through the prototype that was originally created. And believe it or not, the software that we built looks exactly like this. So in this particular case, there's a main page for the digital twin, right? And so we described kind of what all the pieces were on this particular page. So the UI designer designed this initial screen, and this is the output from their design effort. The next step is from the main page, they would actually go through and they'd log in. So in this case, they actually have to register with IBM and create what's called an IBM ID to first register. And then from there, then they're going to be able to purchase and add things to their cart, right? So from the actual main page, they can drill into an individual digital twin and click on add to cart. So pretty standard shopping experience, right? Next thing is you can see that they've actually included multiple things in their shopping cart. So the next step in the process in the use case map was proceed to checkout. So they actually they would go through and they would do things like applying coupon codes, right? So if we gave them a discount or a coupon, or they can, if they're done, they would click proceed to checkout. The other option is that they can, so think of that as an alternative path. They would actually be able to click on this and go continue shopping, right? So the next step in the screen was they actually do the checkout. And so you can see in the use case, we specified you need the zip code, the phone number, the email address, right? A summary, and then it's going to ask you for credit card information. So, I'm intentionally using an example, which is a pretty common shopping experience. So you guys can understand what the software is doing or what it's intended to do. The next step was they can actually, after they purchase the digital twin, they can actually import it to one of our software solutions. So one of the offerings I'm in charge of is called Maximo. It's technicians use it to maintain their equipment. And so there's a one-click download to import that digital twin inside of our Maximo system. So that's another use case. And then, so let me stop there. So this is the prototype that came out of the original design. So you can see, one, it's at high fidelity. Two, it looks exactly like live software. And so we took this out and we did some write studies on it, and we took it to some initial customers to validate that this is how they would want to purchase and download a digital twin. And we worked through any issues with the design before we started coding it. So this is an example of an output at high fidelity based upon well-baked design and requirements. So any questions on this before I go talk about the next step? Okay, so far everything I've been talking about is very heavily baked in developers, requirements, and design. That being said, you need a broader launch plan. So part of the process is you do need a launch plan that includes all the rest of the things you need to do. So after you build your prototype, you validate with customers that this is the right thing to build. You potentially get funding because investors like what you're building and they are willing to write you a check. The next thing is you're really going into a detailed launch plan. So you need to have a step-by-step plan as you go through, excuse me, and launch a product. So this should be pretty obvious. These individual steps would then go into an agile process. And then let me switch the order of this for a second. Let me flip over to another screen. I'm going to actually show you a burn down. So give me 1 second while I switch over to Excel. So that launch plan and the steps, whether it's design of each individual screen, it's writing of the user stories or use cases, or the actual steps in the launch plan, you would then typically put this into what's called a burn down chart. So this is where Agile comes into play. And so each of those steps in the launch plan design is being tracked. So this is an example of just a template. I actually originally found this template online, and then I modified it for these, as an example to show you guys what a burn down would look like. So I'm typically tracking, is the use case complete? Is the user interface design complete? Is the development complete? And then is it blocked? Yes or no? Because there could be blockers along the way. And then I'm trying to estimate how long it takes. As you actually fill in all these tasks, you start to record how much time it takes to complete each of these tasks. So it looks like a question came in. If you want to go ahead and read what that question is.
Would you be able to share this burn down chart or let us know where we can find it online?
You can just Google burn down chart and just do XLS or Excel. You should be able to find a bunch of them online. So that's how I originally found it, the first burn down chart or example that I've used. But there's plenty of them out there. So Agile is pretty widely used. So you should be able to find something pretty easily. If you don't, you can come back through the Project Excite team, and I can get this forwarded through. But it may be quicker for you just to search online. Okay. On a burn down, what you're looking for is you're trying to look at the plan. So here's the planned amount of work versus the action. Let's take an extreme. Let's actually say this is going to take 1,000 days. So it could be person days. So there's more than one person. It's now showing me the number of resources needed. So it just bumped this to 26 people. And let's say I actually start to, I just basically do one item a week, which means I'm slowly burning down. What you're going to start to see is you're going to see a divergence from the plan versus actual as time goes on. And that should iterate a little bit faster. So yeah, so it took a second to redraw. So now you're seeing that my plan was showing that I was going to complete this amount of functionality by this particular week. And then my actuals here, because I should be, in order to get these 1,000 days worth of work done to hit the completion within 45 days, I should be doing more per week. that I'm doing here currently. So what it's showing is I'm not going to hit my actual end date. So just a quick example of a burn down in Agile. Agile is more also about, converting these into sprints. So we would typically take, like the first 10 steps or 10 tasks and build it into sprint 1, the second 10, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4, right? And then as we do each sprint, we're keeping track. We're in our case, we use what's called story points to keep track of how much work is getting done in each sprint. And then as a team, we develop what's called the velocity. So we keep track of if there's 4 or 5 people on the team, our velocity is, let's say, for example, 20 story points a week. We're keeping track of whether that's increasing or decreasing. And there's different reasons why it's going to be faster or slower. You may have people on vacation. You may have someone working part-time. You may have some blockers that cause you to slow down your velocity as well. Or you may have you may have estimated tasks improperly as well. So you're not completing the task in that sprint. So it may actually take you 2 sprints to get a task done instead of 1. Okay. So it's back to the presentation. The second thing is, you asked if the developer or person defining the product should be someone separate. There's actually a more important role overall. It's what we call a product owner. It's that one designated person who kind of owns the end-to-end process. They're actually grooming the backlog. They're sequencing the work. For example, in that use case map, which one do I design first? Which one do I design second? And design third? If you don't have a clear product owner, it becomes very hard to drive this process and to iteratively design and build a product. So you can actually Google, once again, Agile product owner and see a bunch of write-ups on what a product owner is and what they do. But they're the one person who's responsible for the end-to-end prioritization of the work and the backlog. On our product teams, anybody can be the product owner. So I actually have sometimes someone on the development team is the product owner. Sometimes someone on the offering team is a product owner. Sometimes I'm the product owner. In certain offerings, I've jumped in and I'm actually acting as the product owner for a period of time to help get the product out quickly. But it's more a point of clarity. Think of this role as like the quarterback, or I'm sorry, as the team captain on a football team. And so that particular player, that person may be the quarterback, but they also get designated as the captain, team captain, right? So it's not necessarily an individual role, but it's a designation that gets assigned. So it looks like another question came in. Just go ahead and answer that.
It was just a comment saying, this is great. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I actually only have one more slide. So I just had another example of a burn down. This is our playback. So as we're designing the product, we do what's called a weekly playback. And that playback is, as I mentioned, is showing how the burn down is progressing. This is actually showing the burn down for a product. I've kind of cleaned it, so we're not releasing any of IBM's product information. But what you're seeing is this is the actual amount of work, and in this case, they did it as a burn up instead of a burn down. It does the same thing, but it's a lot of times it's burning down the other direction. So this is completed points. What you're seeing here is a big spike. And so what happened is someone loaded a whole bunch of user stories, which changed the scope of the project, right? And so as I was doing a weekly playback, I saw that, oh my gosh, we just tripled the scope of this effort. What did you do? What happened? So obviously the scope got pulled back the next sprint to say, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we shouldn't expand the scope of this product. It doesn't make sense to do that. So we kind of met him in the middle ground. So the scope actually got changed to here. And so now this actual diagram is projecting the release date of April 30th for this particular product. And once again, week over week, I'm seeing the amount of story points that are completed per week. Plus I'm seeing the total story points that are projected for the entire product. So I have a view of both estimated and total scope and then completion along the way. Any questions on this? But like I said, I wanted to give a real example of a project status that kind of shows velocity and progress. Certainly if you're working on a 2-person team, you guys, I would still do a daily stand-up, but you guys will most likely know where things are at. It's typically when you get 3, 4, 5, 6 people that you start needing to do burn down, so everyone can show up on the weekly playback and say what they've completed. And when they mark it in the burn down chart, it's going to show the total output, and it's going to show if you're on or off track based upon your original plan and when you think you're going to get the work done and who's going to do what in what order. Okay. So that's all I had. Just wanted to see if there's any questions, just to wrap up. But that's all the material that I had.
Thank you so much, Joe. And you guys can click the little like raise your hand button so I can unmute you and you can ask questions yourselves. I actually have one quick question.
Okay.
What do you think would be like, or what did you find really important for somebody to like do a startup? What do you think is beneficial, or what you could have told your past self?
I think validating and having a clear definition of what problem you're trying to solve, and making sure the market's big enough and worth it. So I've been around a lot of entrepreneurs. I've launched a lot of software products. I've seen friends of mine waste 5 to 7 years of their life building a product that's a nice to have, right? So the product and solution didn't generate a high enough value to make it worth it. And then it winds up being a really long slog. And they get customers. They actually generate revenue. Some of them get funding as well, but they wind up creating a $5 to $7 million company that took them 7 years to build, when they could have spent that same amount of time and effort. It's still the same amount of work, and build a $50 to $75 million company, or build a $100 million to $1 billion company as well. So really have a clear idea if there's actually enough value, because there's a lot of things you can build and design. But, for example, a friend of mine was designing a garage space organizer application. I was like, why are you doing that? And that's, who's going to pay for that? It's a nice to have. It's actually useful, but the amount of time you're going to spend trying to convince people to use it to organize their garage is pretty high compared to the amount of value that they're going to get out of it. So yes, you can build a software tool that does that, but no one's going to pay for it. And you're going to spend the next 7 years of your life working on it. And all you're going to have is a lot of work and burn a lot of time. So once again, I'm using those high fidelity prototypes to validate whether or not someone would be willing to write a check. And it helps me clarify even to investors what I'm trying to build in terms of a product as well. So spend more time in design and market validation before you waste your time and waste investors' money as well. So I tend to be very close to very guarded with taking in investor money. I don't want to lose somebody's money. I don't want to like a lot of the venture capital firms. They get their money from family funds. They also get them from like teachers' credit unions and stuff like that, who are expecting a return on their investment. So I don't want to lose somebody's retirement income. I don't want to lose somebody's family fund on my ridiculous idea. And so I truly want to build stuff that's useful, that's going to generate value, that's going to generate profits, and build a market around it. So you're better off spending more time on the upfront of the effort versus wasting your time on the back end.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
And another question we have is any advice for a solopreneur interested in startups that doesn't know how to code? Raise funding to hire or fund a co-founder that can code?
There's lots of ways to hire coders nowadays. So one, it's the economy is global. So if you have a good product idea and you can sell, then you can actually get a product to market without being a coder. So you can hire coders. You can, especially if you're hiring them overseas. I've used tools like Upwork to hire coders, right? To get programming tasks done at a relatively low cost. So that being said, if you don't define what the developer needs in detail, you could potentially burn a lot of money building the wrong solution or having them guess what you need as they're trying to build it. So high fidelity design will drive costs out of the development cycle, but you don't have to be a coder. I took coding classes in college. I coded when I was an intern at IBM and graduated and did a few programming tasks, but I've never coded since. So it's been 26 years since I've coded, and I've launched over 20 products. So I'm not a coder, nor would any of my developers want me to code. They would not want a single line of code that I've written. I'm not the coding guy. I come up with ideas. I'm really good on the design side, and I'm good at selling. I'm good at convincing customers to write $6 million checks. So that's what I do. I'm not a coder. If I would rather jump off a bridge than stare at thousands of lines of code and find the one line that has a bug in it that's causing my program not to work. I did it in school, so I understand how coding works, so I can talk to developers. But I'm not a coder. I don't have the patience for it, and I'm not detailed enough to write lines of code and find the one line that's messed up. Another question?
So when you first started, did you raise funding first before hiring coders?
No, what I've done is I started working in other companies. So I spent the time launching products for other companies first before I went off and started writing my own checks. But I've also, I've been taking over companies more as CEO, existing companies that are funded by private equity firms versus going and starting my own company from scratch. I've launched a lot of products from scratch, but I've gotten companies, either the company I was at, or I stepped into a company that already had funding in order to do that, in order to get the product funded and launched. So I think one of the things I learned early on is that I was watching, in that time I was in Austin, Texas, I was watching who was getting funding and who wasn't. And the private equity firms and VCs were funding the same 5, 10, 15 people over and over and over again. So they would launch a company, then they would sell it, then they would fund the guy's next company. They would launch a company and then sell it. So I just went and worked for those people. I went for the people who are getting funding and launching companies first. Then I made connections, and then I built up trust. And once those individuals saw that I can actually get a product launched quickly, then they were willing to put me in a position of being a CEO or a COO or other positions as well. So it's a different path. It's hard to get funding. I think there needs to be better realistic expectations. You're more likely to get funding from friends and family than you are from private equity firms. Because if you look at the amount of companies they're funding the top 1%, 2%, 3%. And so it's pretty hard. So my suggestion would be to go work for someone else, launch a couple products, get some experience. So then when you do go launch a product, you're more likely to get funding then, because most investors, I can't say no one, but most investors are not going to write a $3 million check to someone who's never launched a product before. But on the other hand, they're more likely to write me a check because I've launched 20 products, right? So if I wanted to get funding, I'm pretty sure I can go do it now pretty easily because I've launched so many products. I've got a track record that shows I'm not going to waste that investors' money. On the other hand, there's some individuals they're still in school. Bill Gates, Michael Dell, on and on and on, right? I don't want to discourage anyone from just going for it. But it's, like I said, the success rate's much, much lower. without the experience. But like I said, if you want to go for it, go for it. I wouldn't. I'm sure there's a number of people who told Michael Dell he wasn't going to be able to launch a PC company that eventually took on IBM. By the way, he took on IBM and beat them, as well as other players in the market. So he started off in his college dorm room. But it's hard to do. And certainly it's not an easy path because you don't have the experience to make the right decisions. Any other questions?
It doesn't look like we have any other questions, but thank you so much for being here today, Joe, and thank you for this amazing presentation. Thank you for everybody else who came and joined. If you have any more questions, you can always email us at projectxsite@du.edu. And if you want to see all the other workshops we have, you can visit us at projectxsite.org/xsite-explore. And yeah, do you have any last comments?
Just best of luck and just keep at it. I think the Excite's a great program. It's I've been mentoring through the program for a couple years now. Little less in the past year because I was actually traveling, but I've got no excuse now because I'm holed up at home because of COVID-19. So, so I could do online mentoring, I guess, right now. So, but it's a great program. So you guys are lucky to have a program like that and have a mentorship program to guide you along because most do not. So it's a great program. Best of luck, guys. Take care.